where I was born was really early.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with airplanes, but on Maple Avenue in Marietta, Georgia. And
What year?
1924. I got that in there.
Yeah.
I remember it. No, I've been told. I'm sure I don't remember it.
Yeah.
But then the family moved to Kennesaw Avenue, which was around the corner from there, and lived there until they entered World War II, left home. And then during that time they moved again, but anyhow, that was the places I lived up to then. And I guess my first memory of anything aeronautical in any way was the accident at Kennesaw Mountain. The airway at those days was from Chattanooga to Atlanta, and it passed exactly across the top of Kennesaw Mountain as a path. And Kennesaw Mountain was only 700 feet high, so it shouldn't have been an obstacle, but it was.
You call that a mountain?
Yeah, it was just sticking right up out of the flat ground, so it made a big differential. And of course, easy to avoid if you could see, but you couldn't see flying through there. You had to know where it was. And I could relate to that in much later years when McCall Airport was right at the base of Kennesaw Mountain. And whenever you flew in a low visibility around there, everybody kind of eased over to the north of the field to be sure they didn't get close to the mountain. Okay. But anyhow, at the mountain, one time in the early airmail days, which would have been in 1927, which would make me 3 years old, an airmail airplane ran into the top of Kennesaw Mountain, and there happened to be one great big granite rock sticking up right there just below the top of the mountain, and facing the way the north where the airplane was coming from, was just a flat side about 50 feet high, and that airplane ran smack into that, right in the middle of that flat place, and demolished the airplane, burned up, of course, and the pilot burned up too. And I remember very vaguely that I guess my mother must have carried me up there. Everybody from town went up there. It was about 2 miles from the center of town, but boy, the whole town went up there. And saw the wreck and the burning. I don't remember any details, I just remember seeing it and seeing them carry the body of the pilot out, and he had no arms and no legs. They carried him out, carried him down. That made a pretty strong impression, and I hope I utilized that the rest of my flying career to be cautious all the time. So maybe it had a good effect, I hope so. Then that was probably about 2 years later, about the time I started school, 5 or 6. An airplane landed in a cornfield about half a mile from my house on Kennesaw Avenue, further from town. And it was a pretty big field, and he landed there, and the pilot went to town, I guess, but I don't know. But we all ran down to see the airplane. That was a Davis airplane, parasol monoplane had an eagle paint job. It was black and white and had eagle's feather scallops on it. Very pretty, prettiest thing I'd ever seen. And I'm sure that excited my interest in aviation. And right through that period, I guess right about that time, I began to have an interest in airplanes enough to try to. I was probably reading Mechanics Illustrated and maybe Model Airplane News. I think I did have some Model Airplane News back into 1929, so I was probably reading some of those and interested. The model thing began to interest me, so started building models a little at a time. Very little at those days, but I built slowly and continued building more or less off and on the rest of my life, till you know where it is, till today. Yeah. So that's always been an interest, and very rewarding interest. And built my first model airplane when I was about 6, just about the time I started school, and built it out of matchsticks and mucilage glue, and it flew far enough to break a light bulb in the kitchen where I lived. I tried to fly it in the kitchen, and it circled around and hit the light bulb, shattered the light bulb, and my father shattered my aviation career about that time, said no more flying in the house. And so let's see, moving up the ladder of time, it's hard to say when the next actual events, there was model things happening slowly. And so about the time I was in high school, I guess, My next door neighbor, who was my second cousin, named Earl Benson, unknown to me, I just wasn't aware of it, acquired his private license. He was, I believe, 3 or 4 years older. He was in his late teens and got a private license, and I really remembered admiring him so much for that, and certainly was interested in it. At the same time, the pilot group in Marietta, I'll call, that was growing a little, and they had an old racetrack down near Smyrna, about 5 miles from Marietta South, opposite my house, maybe 6 miles from my house, and they got an old racetrack, motorcycle racetrack down there that had a big infield that wasn't smooth at all, but it was void of trees, and people started landing in there, and finally that area developed into had actual marked off runways, and they had a hangar there. And that's where I got my first airplane ride, in a Ford Trimotor that landed in that infield, and had a Mexican pilot with a handlebar mustache that stuck out inches on each side of his face, and was thoroughly waxed, I'm sure. It stuck out. And my dad bought me a ticket on it, and I got the ride, but it was had 10 seats in the cabin, and there were 11 people, and that guy scratched his head a little bit, and I was pretty small, so he motioned me and put me in the co-pilot seat.
Wow.
Which I was thrilled at the moment, but so thrilled I didn't really watch what was going on. And when he took off, he had the yoke, the Ford had a center yoke post with a V and a wheel on both knobs, so to speak. And he had this one, and he had that all the way forward, going forward, and I was watching that, and I don't know what else I was looking at, until he got to flying speed, and he pulled back on that thing, and this side, the yoke hit me right in the nose and blew up my nose.
Oh,
it really hurt, but I
nose?
didn't mind. I didn't care. I went right along with it. I was too thrilled by the event, and I enjoyed the ride and got along with it. That was a pretty combined event there. That was first flight. And let's see, after that, I don't think modeling was going on all the time. And during that period, I met Bill Cannon, who was dating my older sister, and he started bringing model airplanes to the house and taking me out to the field where they would fly model airplanes. He and a friend named Hugh Gillum were good buddies, and they flew models and were expert at it. And when I moved here, I still had a wing that Hugh Gillum had given me in those days. Saved it all that time. And so Bill Cannon was a big influence on my modeling career, and as we know in the modeling field today, he went on to be very prominent and is in the Modeling Hall of Fame. He grew up right there in our hometown. He worked on a radio repair shop in the back of the furniture store there, and that gave him the radio knowledge when he got modeling on up later years. When RC came along, he started eventually into the radio field and started manufacturing RC radios and made all the Canon brand of radios, which did well for many years.
I've still got one of his radios.
Have you?
Yeah, it's a transmitter with a little
green case?
No, it has a tan case, and it was single stick, and it had a receiver and a servo in one block.
Yeah, a block. It was called a block.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an innovation he made. And EK, another radio manufacturer, took it up and made a 3-servo block with a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And those things were pretty popular during the first 10 years of RC flying. And trying to think of events beyond that.
Now, I wasn't paying too much attention to. Did you talk about how did he hand carve the props?
Oh yes, there weren't any propellers other than handmade in those days.
You said that I forget what it was. You said he would with some kind of intricate carving. You told me about one time, and you couldn't believe he could do it.
I don't know what details you might have remembered there, but I sure remember his prop carving because he was expert at everything, including props. And he came to the house to date my sister one evening, and we had a pretty big double living room, that house did. And he had a little mid-wing model that was about, I would say, 6 inches in span, as small as anything we've done recently in RC and electrics. And it was just plain balsa and Jap tissue covered and rubber powered, and it had a little propeller that was probably maybe at the most 1.5 inches long, but it was exquisitely carved with quite wide blades and grabbed a lot of air. And he wound that thing up and launched in the living room, and it flew in a nice tight circle right around the living room until it ran out. Didn't make it fly very long, but maybe a couple of circles it made. And I just went through the ceiling. I thought that was so wonderful. And that was just one of the things he did. He also entered the yearly Junior Birdman contest for a scale model, and he brought the Boeing P-268 model that he made for, I believe that year was probably 1935, I don't know, I can't remember that. But he had made one that everybody in the United States made the same model, and he entered it in regional contests and all around, worked their way up. He didn't win, but I don't know if the airplane that won could have been any better. His model was just perfect. And he really gave it to my sister, but I got to keep it. And that was really a wonderful, beautiful thing for me, and gave me a lot of impetus to try to build models, which I did for years. Built a lot of my own designs and popular designs that you could buy plans for years there. And continued that until I went off to college, and went to college up at Young Harris, Georgia, and got to be friends as a freshman there with an undergraduate kid who was the son of the president of the school, and they had a big house on the campus, and it had a big basement, and he was interested in models. So I bought a Comet Zipper. It was, I think, the first kit I ever bought. And he and I would go there after school at night and evenings at night and build that model in his basement. And the school year was over before we finished. We were pretty slow, but we didn't finish it there, so I took it home with me back to Marietta and finished it there and flew it, so it flew fine. That was my first kit model. It was a good flying airplane. It was a high-wing pylon type airplane.
Kind of like a Playboy?
Yeah, very much like it, only it was a much more speedy one. The Playboy is a kind of a floater, but this was a Zipper, is a speedy one. But it had polyhedral wing and lifting tail, a lot of characteristics, but it would really fly well. And that was my first kit and my first model engine too. That was a Olson Rice 19.19 engine. About all I remember about that. Then after school, when in fact I entered the Navy from school, directly from school, didn't even go home. And so modeling was over for the years of the war through 1945 then. And then after the war, took up modeling at the field where I was working as a flight instructor, Park Air, and built models. U-control models came along by that time, and built U-control and free flight models. And carried the modeling thing on there. Then time-wise, RC came along in the mid-50s, and by 1959 to 60, RC was a pretty big thing. In the meantime, at 1958, I started a model store in Marietta there, and kept that going for a couple of years. There wasn't one in town, so I had a store there for models. And I don't think of any other events really in modeling, unless you want to go into getting into RC flying. And once that started, I enjoyed that. So it was such a good combination of everything. Pretty much that's all I did in modeling. All the other phases of modeling kept going, but I stayed pretty much with RC.
How long did you have the hobby shop?
A couple of years, 58 and 59. And then gave it to a friend of mine, Wallace Hudson, who had learned to fly in the Champ back at Park Airfield, and traded me model airplane engines for teaching him to fly. And we'd been flying together then, and he got in the store, and when I left the store, I gave him the store, and he stayed there for a while. And well, when I left Marietta to move out here to Oregon, he and I are still flying together. He's still flying today. He's still there flying right now. He does air photography. So he's a wonderful fellow. And was right with me just about all the time I was in the RC contest line. He would be my caller and pit man, helped me a whole lot. He never did take up model flying quite seriously enough to get into competition, but he enjoyed it and has always gone to contests with me and to RC events. So enjoyed his being there with me during those days. So then RC contest went on into the,
Let me stop here.
okay.